when a company decides that a cash dividend is in order, we have to always remember the three dates that are of importance for accounting transactions, and I have those listed here. One is the date of declaration, second is the date of record, and third is the date of payment. So these are each significant and they all represent something different. The date of declaration is the date that the board actually gets together and says, okay, yep, we're going to declare a dividend. And so when they make that declaration, they're making that public. And when they make that public, that's a legal binding obligation that, they now have to at some point pay out that dividend. So they're simply declaring it. And we know that a dividend is a distribution of earnings. And so when we declare we're going to pay that dividend, we're logically going to pull out of the retained earnings bucket the size of the dividend because we're making an obligation at that point. And so we're going to go ahead and reduce retained earnings when we declare the dividend. And in this case, it happens to be on March 1st. So my journal entry would start on March 1st of 2016, and I would debit retained earnings. And the amount of the retained earnings that I'm going to pull out of here is fairly simple, right? They tell us that we have 120 million shares outstanding. We pay a dividend on all the outstanding shares. We don't pay a dividend on the treasury stock, which is why we subtract that from the number of shares that have been issued. We're going to pay $1 per share. So we're simply going to pull out of retained earnings $120 million. Those numbers are in millions. So I'm going to debit retained earnings for $120 million. And I haven't paid that out yet. The payment will happen on the date of payment, and that's later. And so at this point, I've simply got a promise that I'm going to pay it out in the future. So I would credit this cash dividends payable account, and the size of that payable is obviously the size of the amount we've declared. So on the date of declaration, this is the entry: debit retained earnings for the size of the obligation, and credit dividends payable for the size of the payment that will be made in the future. So the date of record is simply nothing more than an opportunity for the company that is going to handle the dividend to get all of their books in order and say, okay, you have to own the stock on this date, which is the date of record. In this case, the date of record is March 11th. So on March 11th, you have to own the stock and you will get the actual dividend, but you won't get it until the date of payment. So if you think about what's happening, we're simply just keeping track at that point of who owns the stock. There's no change in the amount we've already set aside to distribute to the shareholders, and we're not actually paying it yet. So on the date of record, there's never any entry. There's no entry. The last date is the date of payment. This is pretty straightforward, and this happens to be on April 3rd in our example here. We're going to actually pay out that dividend, so we're going to debit this cash dividend payable to signify that it's now being paid. We would debit cash dividend payable for the $120 million, and we would actually credit cash for that same $120 million. So those are the three dates: date of declaration, date of record, and date of payment, and how the accounting entries should look for each entry.